I would like to introduce to you Dr. Matt Bloom. Matt Bloom is emeritus professor at the Mendoza College of Business at the University of Notre Dame. For almost 30 years, he studied the well-being of those in helping and healing professions, and he now spends his time working on ways to help these amazing people flourish in their work. Matt has a PhD in psychology from Cornell University, and Matt and his wife, Kim, who is a counseling psychologist, split their time between Washington, D.C. and the Blue Ridge Mountains. Among Matt's favorite well-being practices are hiking the trails around their home, reading poetry, and baking bread. We are excited to engage with Matt's work today as we consider what well-being is, and as we engage the opportunity to think about our own well-being and the well-being of the communities we're in, both for our congregations and beyond. Please welcome Dr. Matt Bloom.
Thank you. Thanks, Bishop. Well, good morning. It's always a great opportunity when I get to spend time with a group of pastors. I've learned a lot about pastors over 30 years. I'm thinking about when I was a boy, pastors were a little bit ominous figures. When I was a young boy, the pastor of the church we attended was Reverend Dr. McClure, always Reverend Dr. McClure. And I only saw him in this black robe that looked imposing, and he was always up on the chancel, kind of up on the pulpit, just one of these people that was sort of up there, a super person. And one Sunday morning, as my mom was trying to get my brothers and sister and I out the door, suddenly in front of us, Dr. McClure appeared. I still think he just materialized. And so he greeted us, and we didn't say anything. We were scared to death. And my mother, I think, got a little bit nervous, so she said to us, "You know who this is?" And I didn't say anything, but one of my younger brothers, looking up at Dr. McClure, said, "Yes, it's God." Well, of course, it wasn't God. One of the things that I'm most concerned about is that how ministry is incredibly important, but it is incredibly challenging. And so today, I've got the opportunity to help you think together, we'll think together as a group, about well-being in ministry, not just your own well-being, although we'll start there, and not just the ministries of your church, but the ministries in the larger world around you. So we're going to start this morning thinking about your well-being, and I'll be thinking about mine. And so we'll grapple with the idea of what well-being is. And I'm going to share a model that is a scientific model, a model that's come from the research my team and I did and other researchers. So we'll work through this model, and I'll give you an opportunity and invite you to think about your well-being. But I also want us to bring together theology. That's what you will bring. And Bishop Regina just offered us one of the most beautiful and compelling theologies of well-being. Well-being is not just a scientific thing, it's also a spiritual thing. And so I'll invite you to bring in the theology and together think about good practices, the ways that we can encourage and develop and foster our own well-being, the well-being of the people around us, and the well-being of the communities in which we live. So the science that I'm going to share with you has come out, as Bishop Regina said, of over 30 years of research on the well-being of people who work in the helping and healing professions. So these are international humanitarian workers, public school teachers, clergy, global health workers, domestic health care workers, human rights attorneys. But by far the biggest group we studied was clergy, people like you, across the Christian spectrum. So I'll be sharing insights from that research with you this morning. So we'll think about what well-being is, and then we're going to think about what can we do about it. And I'll be sharing with you some practices that research shows can be really, really helpful. And they're simple practices. The best practices are the simple practices. And so as we work through that, I do want you and ask you to think about your own well-being. But then after lunch, we're going to be thinking about our well-being on a global stage. But one of the most important well-being practices is this one, that small actions add up over time to big changes in well-being. Making a big change is almost never the right approach. And there are several reasons. One, big changes take a lot of resources and a lot of energy and a lot of time. And two, unless you get everything right, you may cause more harm than good through a big change. It's better to do little things, bit by bit, that add up to the changes that you aspire to. So we'll keep that in mind. Small steps, small actions add up over time to big changes in well-being. When we think about our well-being, I'm going to invite you to use a metaphor from the biological world and to think about well-being ecosystems. And after lunch, I'll share more about this. When you think about an ecosystem in nature, it's a place in which the plants and animals that live there live in a rich symbiotic relationship. The well-being of any one organism has a dramatic impact on the well-being of the whole. And likewise, the well-being of the whole has an impact on the well-being of each individual. So we'll begin to apply this scientific understanding to the ecosystems in which you live. Perhaps the closest ecosystem for you is your family, certainly your church or ministry context, and then we'll expand it to the communities around us. And then I hope to encourage and empower you to think about what you can do about it, what we can do about it. What can we do about the well-being of those ecosystems in which we embed ourselves? So let's start with what well-being is. We'll work through this model before lunch. We'll take a break for lunch, and then we'll come back and again think about applying it to these ecosystems. So I'm going to work step by step through these 5 dimensions. And I'll have this on several of the slides, so you don't have to see it now, but this is a short 10-item survey that you can go to give you a sense of your well-being on each of the 5 dimensions. And so at some point in time, I would invite you to go and take that brief little survey, that brief assessment. So let's start with daily well-being. Daily well-being is about the quality of our day-to-day experiences, how our days are and how they add up over time. A shorthand way of thinking about daily well-being is this. At the end of most days, do you feel like this? Or at the end of most days, do you feel like this? Daily well-being is really about having more good days, as you define good, than bad days. More good days than bad days. More days that are uplifting and positive and rich and stress-free than difficult or challenging days. Now, difficult days are a fact of life. We know that, of course. But there are some times that we can do things to shape the way that our days unfold. And so we'll talk about some well-being practices that get to that. How do we think about the days and how they're unfolding and what we can do about it? So in our well-being model, this is where stress lives. Stress is an accumulation of a lot of difficult days, a lot of what I'm going to call bad days. Stress doesn't happen in any one moment. Stress is something that unfolds over time. The thing about our daily lives, though, is that once a day has passed, it kind of fades into the background. We kind of forget what it's like. We maybe have a general sense, yeah, the past few days have been good or not so good, but we don't know the details of what made a day good or bad. So let me illustrate. And I'm going to ask for audience participation. It's only raising your hands. Let me illustrate how we forget about our days. How many of you remember what you had for the last meal of the day yesterday? How many remember whatever the last meal was? That's awesome. Okay. How many of you remember what you had for the last meal of the day 10 days ago? If you have a set menu, you probably remember. How about 6 months ago Tuesday? Do you remember what you had? So somebody in the background claims, I'm going to talk to that guy and find out how he remembers. He's either got an amazing memory or a great menu. The point is, of course, is that we do forget our days. We need to take a look at our days and see how they're unfolding. What matters is not any one good or bad day. It's that the pattern of our days tend towards more good days. So this would be somebody that, at least last week, had generally a really good week. Yeah, there were some tough days, some grumpy days, maybe some days in which they had to do difficult things. But this is a pattern of somebody who we would say has high well-being on daily well-being. And this is somebody who doesn't. Now, you'll notice Sunday's always a good day, of course. It's the pattern of how our days unfold over weeks and months that matters most to us. And not just last week, but 2 weeks ago, and 3 weeks ago, and 6 weeks ago Tuesday. Stress accumulates over long periods of time. Stress accumulates over long periods of time. So what happened last year and 9 months ago could be affecting your well-being today. So a part of this then is how do I know if I'm having enough good days? Well, what science suggests is you need to have 3 good days for every 1 bad day that you have. On average, you should have 3 good days for every difficult day you have. Now, there's a lot in this little simple ratio. What it shows you is that negative days impact your well-being a lot more than positive days. And this is true. What's also hidden here is that there is a positive spillover effect from a really, really good day. If you have an awesome day, it's going to make the next 2 days better than they otherwise would be. You get this positive carryover effect. The unfortunate news is that there's also a carryover effect for really difficult days. They carry over 4 days into the future. A really difficult day is going to make the next 4 days more difficult unless you do something about it. Now, if we stop just a minute and think about the people in our ecosystem, if somebody has a really, really difficult day, and we respond in a caring way on the day of the event, that's great. But the science tells us we need to be there for 4 days in the future at least. We need to be there to care for them for those next 4 days so that that carryover effect is diminished. So in general, now we don't want to be hard about this. It doesn't mean that, oh my gosh, I had a bad day, so now the next 3 have to be good. It's paying attention to the pattern and then noticing in general, is this a pattern that is in keeping with this sort of a ratio? One of the studies we did, pastors were incredibly generous with their time. One of the studies we did is we asked pastors to keep track of their daily well-being. I'm going to show you in a minute how we did that. And some of them kept track of their well-being over 6 months or 9 months. And we had many, many, many pastors as a part of this because we wanted to know, were pastors in general experiencing a 3-to-1 ratio? And unfortunately, they weren't. Most pastors, it was 1-to-1. In other words, they had as many bad days as they had good days. But what struck me even more was that most of them didn't realize it. They had this vague sense that something was difficult. They just didn't know it. And once they saw from their own reporting that their days were difficult, they were empowered to do something about it. So let's talk about a wise well-being practice. And it's a practice that we first used in that study that we found out can be really, really powerful. And we call it, remembering that small actions add up to big changes over time, we call it map your days. It's pretty simple. It's a great practice. I do it every 6 months or 12 months. I'm going to encourage you to do it the old analog way. Do it on paper. Don't use your phone. And so think about getting a piece of paper or a calendar and you put it somewhere where you'll see it at the end of a day. And then very, very quickly, without second-guessing yourself, without trying to correct it, think about, was this a good day or a bad day? And if it was a good day, you might put a smiley face down. And then think about, again, very quickly, what was a high point for the day and what was a low point for the day? And really work hard not to censor yourself. Like if you think it was a bad day, don't talk yourself out of it. You know, if you think a low point of the day was that, God, that Matt Bloom came in again and complained about something, then put down that Matt Bloom came in again and complained about something. And try to do that for 2 weeks. A quick assessment of whether it was a good day or a bad day without second-guessing yourself, and write down a high point or a low point. With 2 weeks of information, you've got a lot of things to learn from. And once you've done that, then look back. Look back at the good days, the positive days, and see what the high points were. And you're going to learn something about what makes your days rich. I'm going to share with you some of what we learned about the good days. And then on the difficult days, look for the low points. What were the things that were really, really challenging for you? It's a simple practice, but it's a powerful practice. And I'm sure you're going to learn something that you didn't know about what makes your days unfold to be better or worse. This is some of what we learned when we asked humanitarian workers and physicians and then pastors to keep track of this. In general, humanitarian workers said a good day was one in which they felt like they made an impact through their work. They made a difference. Another thing that made days really, really good is something that humanitarian workers call accompaniment. It's simply living life together. They don't think of themselves as there to help other people. They think of themselves as there to be a part of a community that together is helping each other. So a real sense that there was accompaniment, community, camaraderie, friendship made their days better. And then they loved days where they felt like they somehow grew in their ability to do their work well. Even small things mattered a lot. What made days not so good? Administrative tasks. The burden of administrative tasks. And the reason is important. It's not because the task itself was so bad. It's when the tasks took them away from the things that made the day good. The task took them away from the work that they felt called to do. Being ineffective in their work. Humanitarian workers, well, everybody in these professions we find tends to be very hard on themselves. So if they somehow made a mistake, they really, really took it seriously. And then contentious interactions. Difficult, conflict-ridden interactions. This is what physicians told us. Number one, helping patients. If they felt like they really did good medical work, that made their days great. Solving difficult problems. Physicians love to solve difficult problems. They love to figure out when something is really difficult or going wrong with someone. They're the ones that figure out how to make a difference. And again, growth in their ability to practice well. What made their days difficult? Administrative tasks, same reason. Physicians complain a lot about insurance. It's not because the insurance is a problem as much as the fact that it takes them away from caring for their patients. Bureaucratic obstacles, they really, really don't like it when the organization gets in the way of them practicing healthcare well. And contentious interactions. Physicians told us when they put that down, they said, I didn't realize how much contentious interactions affected me. They didn't realize it until they put it down. This is what we learned from pastors. Caring for others, meaningful worship, and growth in their ability to minister well. There's some common patterns here. Administrative tasks, same reason. It's not the task itself so much as the fact that it takes them away from what they think is most important. Being ineffective in ministry, pastors are really hard on themselves. You're really hard on yourselves. And contentious interactions. And again, what pastors told us was, I just didn't want to admit that they were that hard for me. I didn't want to admit that the complaints that came in the door or those emails that were somehow critical, I didn't want to admit that they mattered so much, but they do. So let me encourage you to think about map your days. And then imagine, we're going to do this after lunch, imagine if you did the same thing for the life of your church. When the church gathers in small groups, when you think about those members of the congregation that can't gather, what are the contours of their day like? And what are the things that make the gatherings or the life of the church good? And what are the things that make the gathering of the life of the church difficult? But for now, yes, focus mostly on yourself. Another really good, oh my gosh, I just realized something. I have gum in my mouth. Sorry. Oh my goodness. My mother, bless her, is somewhere shaking her thumb at me, or finger at me. Okay, another practice is something that's called emotional granularity. One of the things that I'm sorry about with researchers is we don't come up with simple terms, or we have to come up with these complex terms. Like I'm emeritus professor, which just means I retired from being a professor. But it sounds a lot more important to say emeritus. Emotional granularity is a way of thinking more richly about the experiences you have. So let's say I am a member of your congregation, and I am that kind of person that is always coming in and sniping at you. You might just ordinarily think, gosh, I'm really frustrated with Matt's comment. But when you're emotionally granular, you think and describe that to yourself in a much richer way. Think about wine labels. You know how wine labels are? Opens with delightful notes of blueberry, and they always say things like blueberry and tobacco, I guess is good. And then, in the middle, there's this rich flavor of caramels and cocoa, and then it ends with a rosy aftertaste. You're trying to describe some of your experiences, especially the really good ones or the really difficult ones, with that kind of richness. So you might say something like, I have a feeling of heaviness in my bones and a sharpness in my heart after Matt's comment. I feel boxed in as if Matt is trying to undermine me, and I want to escape from this situation. In ways that researchers don't fully understand, describing your particularly good or bad experiences with this richness, with this granularity, helps you understand them better. And for the difficult experiences, it makes them sting a little less. And for the good experiences, it makes them a little bit better. And the more you practice this, the more practicing it makes those difficult experiences not quite so bad and makes those good experiences even better. And again, I'm already beginning to imagine, what would it be like to practice this in the life of the ecosystems that you're a part of? To describe the great experiences with a richness, and to be willing to tackle the difficult experiences with a richness. And we'll come back to that. So that's daily well-being. The second dimension, and after this dimension I'm going to give you a chance to think and reflect on your own, is called resilience. And daily well-being and resilience go very, very much hand in hand. One part of resilience is our capacity to deal well with the ups and downs of life. In other words, our capacity to deal well with the good days and bad days. So there's a direct connection between resilience and daily well-being. The more resilient we are, the less damaging the difficult days are going to be. And in fact, the more we're going to be able to craft our life to have more positive days than negative days. So part of well-being is dealing with the ups and downs of life. Another part of it is our capacity to adapt and grow, to take on new competencies, to change when we need to. Bishop Regina was speaking so well about this, to adapt and change when we need to as the world around us change. And our thinking about growing always. Remember every single one of the professions I shared with you, growing, developing was a key part of having really great days. So dealing well with what happens now and growing our capacity to deal well with what happens in the future. This is going to be a little bit technical, but don't pay as much attention to the words. I'm just trying to illustrate something here. Our resilience capacity arises out of what neuroscientists call our executive functions. These are some of the executive functions. They're just here to illustrate so you'll understand what they are. Attention and focus, you're using that now. Reasoning, thinking, managing memory, trying to remember things, trying to remember a person's name. Regulating your impulses, regulating your emotions, problem solving. These are all executive functions. You use them every day. You're using them a lot now. And you really need these things when you're facing a difficult experience. When you're having a difficult day, you use a lot of these functions to deal with the challenges. Now, the thing about resilience is it's a bit like a gas tank. When you use it, you temporarily deplete your capacity. There's a temporary deficit in your ability to reason, to focus attention, to solve problems, to regulate yourself. So you need to build back up those capacities. When we first started interviewing pastors, we had wonderful discussions with pastors. A startling number of pastors described themselves as introverts. And when this got to be like 300 or 400 pastors, and 80% of them said they were introverts, it just wasn't possible. Unless churches are going out and saying, oh, let's get the introverts, they'd make good pastors, which I don't think is happening. So we went back to a lot of these pastors and said, why did you say you're an introvert? And some were. So some were. But most told us something like this. After a day of worship, after I've been through the 1 or 2 or however many services I have, I just need to be alone. You know, even being with my family is difficult. And if somebody invites me over for lunch or dinner, I just can't do it. I need to be alone. Well, that's not introversion. That's simply the fact that Sunday mornings tap your resilience. Even a good Sunday morning. Think about those things I was talking about. There's lots of attention and focus that you're applying. You have to think a lot about the order of worship. That's reasoning. You have to remember people's names. Oh yeah, what's that guy? I can't remember. He just doesn't come very... You have to do a lot of memory management things. You have to regulate yourself. You know, when that Matt Bloom comes in that complains, you have to act like you're happy to see him. Oh, thank you. I'm so glad you're here. I'm hoping you'll miss a Sunday every now and again. You're doing a lot of those sorts of things. So you're using your resilience resources. No wonder you're tired. No wonder you're tired. Bishop Regina and her staff, they're so joyful about this event. But at the end of today, their resilience resources are going to be low. They're going to need a chance to recover. I'm going to need a chance to recover, but I got to get on an airplane. So the point being is that we need to think about our Sunday morning experiences, those things in life that do tap our resilience resources. And it's not that they're bad things, it's simply that we have to use our executive functions a lot. If you map your days, you're going to get some insights into those things that tire you out. And some tire you out because they are difficult, and some things tire you out because they're good, but they require a lot of your resilience resources. So I'm going to share with you a trio of well-being practices, and then I'm going to give you a chance to think about this on your own. Each one of these on their own, science shows, will boost your resilience capacity, will fill up that gas tank. But together, wow, they're really powerful. Detach, relax, and grow. The first is that we need to detach from the things that tap our resilience resources. We need to disconnect from those things that are depleting. Not in a bad way necessarily, but that certainly deplete. For you, work, whether you're a pastor or someone else, work is going to be one of those things. And this is what I mean by detach. I mean you're not thinking about it at all, not even in the back of your mind. So if you're like me, seeing my cell phone is going to get me thinking about work. Seeing my computer is going to get me thinking about work. So if I really want to detach, I've got to set those things aside. I think for a lot of pastors, seeing the Bible will remind you of work. You'll be thinking, oh yeah, I need to prepare the sermon for Sunday. The Bible's wonderful, right? But for detachment purposes, if it's going to remind you to think about work, set it aside. Some period of time where you can step out of those roles that demand a lot of you. Ministry work certainly does. And not think about it for a while. So again, part of mapping your days is looking for what are the things that keep you from detaching from work? What are the things that keep you from, for a little bit, forgetting about the things that take your resilience resources? Relax, then, is some activity in which the physical tension from your body is released. It took me a long, long time to figure out how to relax. There's this old joke, but it's not such a joke, that for professors, our bodies are just a way to get our brain from one place to another. We kind of are disembodied. If you go to a faculty meeting and you look at us, you'll see, yeah, they don't think too much about their bodies. We're not always in the best shape. But the point is, I had to figure out what would relax me. Hiking relaxes me. Movement relaxes me. If napping or slugging out on the couch and watching TV relaxes you, awesome. Research supports being a couch potato for some period of time is a good thing. One of my favorite examples of relaxing was a group of humanitarian workers. One of the most difficult jobs. They rescued children from the sex trade. Incredibly demanding work. In order to relax, they had to dance, as they said, like wild people. So every Friday night after work, they turn on this incredibly loud music and just dance, sometimes for 2 hours. They were sweaty and screaming, but it was a way for them to release the physical tension from their bodies. So what are the things that really allow you to relax? Reading a good novel for me really, really relaxes me. And then the last one is activities that you enjoy doing, but that have a kind of mastery element to it. There's an opportunity to develop new competency or skills. I love baking bread. So trying to learn to bake a new kind of bread, or even just perfecting the loaves of the particular kind that I'm making. That would be a growth activity for me. I've already mentioned hiking. There's all kinds of new ways to grow with hiking. I love the gear, so I got to be careful about spending too much on gear, but just even imagining new gear, mapping out a new trail can be that way. Maybe it's gardening. For my wife, Kim, crossword puzzles are one of the things. Word puzzles in general is something that's a growth activity. So thinking about this trio of detach, relax, and grow, these growth activities oftentimes help us do the first two. When you're engaged in the growth activity, you're not thinking about other things. You're lost in the activity itself, which is great. They tend to be physically relaxing. Even if you're active, they tend to release the tension from your body. As I mentioned, hiking really does that for me. I've learned now that I can feel tension, stress in my shoulder. Once I hike a little bit, I'm releasing that sort of activity. So thinking about those, and if you don't have one, it's well worth your time to think about the activities that would be that way. I'm going to give you a break, just a minute, to think about this, but just take a moment when I do to think about, how might we do this in my church? What sorts of detaching, relaxing, and growing activities or events might we engage with the church? Remind me of when we're going to lunch. 12:10? Okay. We have just a few minutes. Let me just give you about 5 minutes or so to just step back and think about this, and then I have this delightful little gong that I'm going to play, and we'll come back and finish from there. So take a few minutes to think about daily well-being and resilience, and then we'll come back. There we go, we're back. I know you just got started priming your thoughts for the future, but there'll be time at lunch to think about it. We only have 2 more dimensions to go through, and then we're going to have this basic framework for what well-being is, and we'll have some thoughts about well-being practices, and then after lunch we'll come back and deal with the 5th, connectedness, and we'll talk about ecosystems. So one of the things I do want you to think about is what your daily well-being map looks like. I really strongly encourage you to do that map your day experience. Take some time over the next couple of weeks and look at your daily life and see what it's like. And again, that will give you some insights into some of the ways you can detach, relax, and grow. The 3rd dimension is meaning, and it has to do with the sense of what we understand as matters in life. Technically, we talk about it as having clarity around your core values and beliefs and feeling like you can live those out on a daily basis. This will be in my slides that you'll get, but what is a core value and what is a core belief? A core value is your enduring convictions about what is right and true and good and noble. You could think of these as the standards that you want to live by and the standards by which you judge things around you. And core beliefs are closely held and often unshakable convictions that shape your understanding of yourself and other people and the world. These are deep, deep, deep things. They tell you what matters most in life. As I mentioned, they guide your sense of what it means to be a good person and to live a good life. Now, in the helping and healing professions, what we find normally is that members score very high on meaning. There's a sense of call to their work. They have a deep understanding of what matters most in life. But they often report really low daily well-being. And there was this conundrum about why is there always this pattern between deep sense of meaning, because going into this research I thought, wow, if you feel called to your work, that must be great for you. The work must be awesome and wonderful. It turns out that maybe that's not the case. And what we found, and I'm not speaking theologically here, well, maybe a little bit I am, but that there is this distinction between sacrifice and suffering that is really, really important in this kind of meaningful work, but that's really, really hard for people to spot. One of the things that makes work so rich when people are called is they feel like they're sacrificing for it. They're giving deeply of themselves. They know that they're really making an impact when they feel that they've somehow given a lot from what they do. So sacrifice, the way I'm using the word, is giving deeply of yourself. Many people in the United States don't get to sacrifice for their work. It's meaningless to them. They don't really feel like they're making an impact. They don't really feel like they can give their best selves. But in sacrifice, we do. The reason a day feels so great is because you've given deeply of yourself and you felt like it made a difference. But suffering is where that starts to erode your well-being, where you start to, if you will, sacrifice too much, where you're giving so much of yourself that it's starting to undermine your own physical and mental health. And what we found in our research is that tipping point between sacrifice and suffering is really, really hard to spot. In the course of our nearly 30 years of research, we interviewed several thousand people who clinically had burned out. A lot of people use the term burnout, but these are people who were clinically burned out, which means that they were so exhausted, so depleted, that they couldn't go on with their work. Somebody who's truly burned out has to take a break, sometimes extended break from their work. But what struck me was of the several thousand people that we studied, not a single one, well, every single one, I should say, thought they could go on a little bit longer. In research, you never get 100%. We did. Every single person that burned out told us, I thought I could go on another day or two. And then I woke up and I couldn't get out of bed. I thought I could go on another day or two, and then I collapsed at work. I thought I could go on a little bit longer, and then I found myself exploding at the people at work and needing to withdraw. What it shows is that we can get down on this suffering cycle, the suffering cycle without even knowing it. This is why daily well-being and resilience are so important. They are what keep you at the top of this curve where life is great and ministry work is life-giving and keep you from falling down on the other side. So the very fact that your work is meaningful is wonderful, but it can cause you to push yourself too far and to give too much. And knowing when you're getting near that tipping point will keep you from falling down into the burnout. One of the other things that struck me is we learned about this. I'm going to start with something good, and then we're going to go to something a little more challenging. One of the good things is that in terms of meaning, most spiritual practices are fantastic for boosting meaning. They can also boost daily well-being. So really, really good worship, in addition to being really, really good worship, is really, really good for your well-being. It's fantastic. It deepens your sense of meaning and connection. This is one of the reasons that I need to go to a community of worship every week. I need to be reminded of what we believe in. I need to be reminded of what it means to live out the call to be a Christian. I need to be in a community of people that believe likewise. But on a good day of worship, it lifts that day. Even if it started out crummy, a good day of worship boosts. Prayer is a great spiritual practice. But for pastors, there's a particular kind of prayer that's really, really good, but one that may not be quite the right kind of prayer for their spiritual practice, and that's intercessory prayer. Intercessory prayer is great, but when you're engaging in intercessory prayer, you're probably thinking about other people. So engage in a prayer practice that is uplifting for you. Contemplative prayer or centering prayer would be examples. Bible study can be great for lay individuals. For pastors, it tends to get you back in the work mode. Can you think about engaging in the Bible in a way that's different from how you do when you're preparing ministry work? All of these spiritual practices can be adapted so that they're uplifting. And for meaning, they need to do things like remind us of what we believe in, reminding us of what it matters, and reminding us of how we live out those core beliefs. But another really important one, and again, I'm sincere, the way that Bishop Regina mentioned this was just powerful. It was a theology of well-being. What struck me was interviewing pastors, how many of them said, I don't even know if well-being is something that biblically I should expect for myself. You know, after all, Jesus and 11 of the disciples died for their ministry. There wasn't this rich theology of what well-being is. I heard one today, but I haven't heard very many of them. I honestly have not heard very many well-articulated, compelling theologies of well-being. What is an abundant life? What does it look like? Why is it good for us? Not just those people out there, but you as well. So articulating a theology of well-being, rooting this sense of well-being within the scripture and within the beliefs that you have is really, really important, because that's where the deeper understanding of well-being will come. Science can help, but you need to root it. So I challenge you to think about your own theology of well-being. So that's meaning. One more, and then it's lunchtime. We call this self-integrity. It's the strength and clarity of your sense of self. But I'm going to give you a research definition, because the way that researchers know this matters is different from what is common. It's not about self-worth. It's a sense that, on the whole, you're a good and capable person, not superior or excellent, but good enough. One of the reasons I'm so interested in ecosystems is because we live in a culture that is constantly trying to show us ways that we're not good enough. We compare ourselves, and we're caused to compare ourselves to other people all the time in subtle and powerful ways. I'm on LinkedIn. I don't go to LinkedIn very much, but for years I would see people posting things. I was really unkind about it, but I would see people posting things like, you know, I'm so humbled to have been voted the most amazing person or something like that, right? But think about what they were trying to do. They were trying to keep up and also try to live a value of humility. I mean, every place we turn, there's something telling us that we're not young enough or smart enough, or we live in a culture that constantly tells us that our worth is based upon how we stack up next to other people, which means, of course, even if you stack up as the best person, sooner or not later you won't be the best person. Self-integrity is being good enough. You're capable. You're kind. You have skills. That's enough. That's what self-integrity is. So yes, that's the kind of self-worth they're thinking about. Not how I compare to other people or the standards, but am I good enough? Can I be confident that I have skills? Can I be confident that there are good things about me? Efficacious means, can I do things in the world that seem to be important to me? We saw this a lot in terms of pastoral identities, and I'm going to push through this rather quickly, but it's a big concern of mine. More and more, we're seeing pastors losing their call to ministry. And I think we have some insights into why. So let me try to do this quickly. A personal identity is a sense of self-integrity. You know who you are as a whole person. You know your good parts and your not so good parts. You know your strengths and you know your weaknesses. You know your preferences. I love to hike. I love baseball. That's a part of my personal identity. Within that personal identity, then there are these other identities that we have, like a life partner. I've been married to Kim for 42 years, so that's a part of my identity, Kim's life partner. Parent and grandparent is a part of my identity. I'm not an artist, but if you're an artist and that was really important to you, that might be. Outdoors person would be a part of my identity. These are really, really important parts of our identity. They're the ways that we define ourselves. Being a pastor is a really important part of your identity. If it overlaps, if it's consistent with your sense of self. In other words, the pastor you are is the pastor that's consistent with your personality, your preferences, your skills, your abilities. So sure, there are some parts of being a pastor that you might not like, that might not be something that come naturally to you. Maybe hospital visits don't come naturally to you. Maybe teaching doesn't come naturally to you. But as long as there are parts of being a pastor that really come naturally to you, and you can do them in ways that are natural to you, then you have what we would call an authentic identity. The challenge is that many, many pastors, particularly if you're a woman or you're a person of color, you're being told that what a proper pastor is like isn't like you. A proper pastor is a stale, pale male. If I had my little Ryan glasses on, right? I'm balding, so that makes me even more that way. If I wore my round glasses, I would be. And I make a joke about that, but there are these powerful expectations that are thrust on. And even old white males in pastoral ministry can be constantly told that somehow the kind of pastor you authentically are isn't good enough. One of my concerns is that coming out of seminary, seminarians aren't given a chance to, first of all, really get to know themselves, and then given permission to really imagine what kind of pastor a person like you could be. Instead, in subtle and sometimes not so subtle way, they're given this idea that a proper pastor has these characteristics and acts these ways. And so a part of having self-integrity in work and certainly in life is to be authentically the person we are. Now, this isn't permission to be unkind. It isn't permission to say, well, sometimes I'm just a jerk, so you got to live with it. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that you can express in good and appropriate ways the real person that you are. And I wonder, in the context of some of our ecosystems, what are the expectations we put on people that somehow constrain them from expressing who they are? Again, there are appropriate ways of doing that. The other thing that happens that we see is what we call identity drift. And this is, you may start ministry work having this sense of authentic pastoral ministry, but over time, just being in certain church contexts, as things around you change, you start to act in ways that just aren't quite as authentic to who you are. And suddenly you find yourself enacting a pastoral identity that's just not really yours. And this drift is really subtle. It's not something that people pick up on. It kind of happens. And you'll notice it, again, if you map your days, you'll notice it when you start to realize that, I used to love worship, but I don't like worship anymore. And then you start to realize that perhaps the way you feel like you should do worship is somehow no longer consistent the way you feel called to do worship. I loved being a professor. But there were some deep changes that happened at my university that really constrained the way that I could teach. And that was my calling, was to teach. And so I needed to leave being a professor because I could no longer do it in a way that was authentic to who I am. But it snuck up on me. And I realized that it snuck up on me when I was really, really cranky with my dean about the classes that I had to teach. Cranky is a really nice way of saying it. I was much more than cranky. And so being honest with ourselves about how have we moved away. And again, this is a subtle sort of thing that happens. So one of the well-being practices I'm going to suggest to you is to go back and revisit that story of your call to ministry and tell the story to yourself again. One of the things when we started to ask pastors to tell us about, how did you become a pastor? Tell us about that story. Some of them, with this real sly grin on their face would say, well, you want the story I told my credentialing board? Or do you want the real story? Yeah, we want the real story, of course, the real story. This storytelling approach is a powerful well-being practice. One of the things that Kim and I do, and she uses it in her practice, is for couples to tell stories of their relationship. Tell the story to each other again of how you met. Tell the story again of how you fell in love. Tell the story of those transformational moments in your relationship. Tell the stories of when you thought you were going to hang it up, but you didn't. These are the rich stories that help ground us in our sense of who we are and our sense of who we are in life. So telling those stories, what were the key moments in the story of how you became a pastor? Who was important in your story, for better or for worse? And how did they have an impact on you? How did you first begin to answer your call to ministry? What were some transformational moments in your life and ministry? Those ones that you would say were really good, and those ones that you say were really difficult. And if you tell these stories, and writing them down or telling them to somebody else is better than just telling them in your head, it will deepen your sense again of who you are, of your pastoral call, of your identity, or if you're a lay person or a lay leader, it will deepen your sense of call to ministry. So tell those stories. And then when we come back after lunch, we're going to talk about connectedness and ecosystems. Did I turn it over to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Matt.